Okay, so we talked about laziness, the first of the five obstacles last week. And so the takeaway from laziness is that it's something that occurs before we have a practice. It's what can prevent us from getting started, from, maintaining a practice because we just get involved in anything other than practice. We get absorbed into other things and we never really start or maintain a practice. The second, and all of the remaining obstacles are obstacles that come into play during sessions of meditation. So they're not applicable to, you know, daily life that doesn't involve, not being able to get started. So the first of these, of the next four, is called forgetting the object. So we've said, of course, that every meditation session, the meditator chooses the object of meditation for that session, whatever it might be, whether it's an analytical meditation or breathing meditation, compassion, love, patience, whatever the object might be. And we discussed before how distraction, of course, is a natural part of the process. And that's really what forgetting the object entails, is when the mind moves away from the intended object to something other than the intended object. So this isn't talking about anything that's unusual or I mean, it's problematic in the sense that we need to address forgetting the object, but it isn't something that's out of the ordinary. We should expect that distractions arise and we move the mind back to the object. So literally the antidote for forgetting the object is remembering the object, or remaining single-pointedly focused on the object. And then there's, as we said, we at least listed the five. So the next obstacle is a pair of obstacles, which is excitation and dullness, or mental sinking and mental agitation, different ways of interpreting into English the same words. So when excitation or agitation is arising in our session of meditation, what that means is that the mind is a bit too bright. The mind is a bit too kind of excited. It's why it's called excitation. The mind is just, we have trouble. The mind typically, we can notice this when we're experiencing that the mind is racing, the mind is just moving very quickly from one object to another object. We just have a lot of movement of the mind. That's mental excitation. Uh, Mental dullness is the opposite, when the energy of the mind is too low, when the mind feels sleepy, the mind is tired, there's a sense of heaviness, dullness in the mind, darkness, weightiness, and we're tending toward drowsiness, we're tending toward sleep. Um, so, it isn't that the mind is just going 1,000 miles, a second, and we're flitting from one thing to another. It's really that it's like molasses in the mind. The mind is just heavy and dark and dull. Um, and these states, of course, are also very common. Um, if there's just maybe we've had a little bit too much caffeine, and the mind is racing, or we're just sort of in that frame of mind, or if it could be closer to nighttime, closer to when we're going to sleep, and we're trying to fit in a session of meditation, then or we didn't sleep very well, and we're waking up and we're thinking, I'll do my session now. But really we're just fighting against a real intense sleepiness in the mind. Those are both experiences that we're going to have. These are two opposite ends of the spectrum, but we're going to experience both of these over the course of, months or years of trying to practice consistently. Um, so when these are arising, of course, we need to identify which is arising, and it's not difficult. We understand that um, either the mind is having trouble staying focused and it's just going to one object over another, or we're just, we're yawning, the head is nodding, we're kind of having trouble maintaining our posture because there's slouching going on, there's a lot of kind of slumping over going on. So if excitation is arising, um, we can um, that's one reason why it can be helpful to start with a couple of minutes of breathing meditation before we go into an analytical meditation, because that helps to quiet the mind, to give the mind, because we know if we are going to use an analytical object, then we are introducing a certain amount of movement of the mind. We know that we will need to investigate various lines of analysis, lines of reasoning, um, and that is an intentional kind of movement of the mind. Whereas a breathing meditation is very focused. There's no thinking, it's just holding the mind to a physical sensation. So that can help to quiet the mind, to narrow down our focus. And we may choose to suspend, even if we started out with that. If we're finding that that's happening in our session, we may choose intentionally to pause that analytical meditation and move into a couple of minutes of kind of focused breathing meditation to kind of tighten our focus a little bit. And then when we feel, that we've got a handle on things, then move back into the analytical meditation. Um, so that's one idea about how to deal with excitation. Another is if we are choosing a visualization. So we may be already doing like a meditation on the Buddha, or we may use a meditation on the Buddha in the same way that we were perhaps using a breathing meditation. And this is actually more common in the Tibetan system, is to use rather than, I mean, they're both common, but I would say that there are some unique benefits to meditating on the image of the Buddha, as opposed to just using the breath, because the breath in and of itself is a neutral object, whereas the form of the Buddha carries with it, the added benefit of getting familiar with the form of the Buddha. And you can, if you study a bit about kind of the meaning of the different aspects of the form, then you're also familiarizing your mind with that meaning. But when you're doing that, if you're visualizing either the historical Buddha or a different enlightened being, typically there's no specific instruction to um, regard that image in ways that, or relate to that image in ways that could serve as an antidote to excitation. But we can change that by, for example, making the image a little bit smaller than it was. If we make the image a bit smaller, the visualized image, a bit smaller than it was before, that helps to tighten down our focus. That helps to narrow down our focus. So generally, when you meditate on a visualized form, it's the typical instruction is about the size of the palm of the hand, so 3 to 5 inches, in length. Um, if you shorten that to, 1 or 2 inches in total length above the crown of your head, that is something that can help to tighten down your focus, which has the benefit of doing something about excitation that's happening. Another idea is to imagine that the visualized form has a weight to it, is heavy in some way. Of course, you always visualize images of enlightened beings as being transparent, being radiant, being made of light. So you're not changing that aspect of it. You really never visualize enlightened forms as being solid, being concrete, but still, even though it's a light, luminous, radiant form, you can imagine that it has, mass to it, that it has uh, a weightiness to it um, at the same time, rather than. So it's not, you're not changing anything, you're just sort of thinking that this form is, by its nature, that it's weighty, that it has some mass. That can also kind of bring the energy of the mind down a little bit by thinking in that way. And that can be an antidote to um, excitation. Another option, so those are two options. A third option, if we're trying to deal with excitation, is to imagine in the body a small dot. And the top half of the dot is white and the bottom half is red. And this is at the level of the navel inside the body. There's a chakra in that kind of general area. So if you imagine this dot, this small round dot, um, in that place, in that way, and you kind of spend a couple of minutes just concentrating, just holding your attention there, then what you're doing is you're focusing on a lower chakra, which can bring the energy, of the mind down. It can calm the mind down if you're kind of grounding your awareness just by holding it. You're really not visualizing in any way the chakra itself here. You're just visualizing it inside the body, roughly at the level of the navel, um, maybe in front of this spine, this, very, very small dot that's colored in that way, maybe about the size of a grain of rice or a mustard seed, sesame seed, something like that. And just by holding your awareness, you are kind of taking, you're bringing your kind of grounding your energy, and that can have the effect of reducing the sort of scattering of the mind that is occurring with mental excitation. So those are three meditative techniques that can reduce excitation. Um, and then, of course, we want to also just check our posture, because, as I mentioned, when excitation is arising, we could find that we've started to look up, because, again, excitation is this rising, this sort of over rising of our energy. So the energy is moving upward. It's kind of, you know and we know that when if we're actually excited about something, something that's happening, we know that we fidget, we can't sit still, the mind is, so it's kind of this bubbling up of energy. It's the same sort of idea with mental excitation when the mind is just racing. Um, so we may find that we've started to literally look up more so than kind of a bit more down. So if we tuck the chin in, it's just something to check. Like, is my energy such that that's what's happening? Is it manifesting that way in my body? So if we tuck the chin back down, that also can have the impact of, tamping down our excitation. Um, and also, it may be We may be in a very, very bright environment. And of course, we've talked about, thinking about the relationship between what we're doing with our eyes and how bright the environment is. Um, but if excitation is arising, if we cut some of that light, then we don't want to cut it so much that we tend toward drowsiness. But if we just cut it a little bit, then that can calm that energy down a little bit. So that's something else you can check if it's just a really, really bright environment. Um, and then the last idea that we could use, or antidote that we could use, is to think to, again, suspend the session, the chosen object, and to spend a couple of minutes thinking about something that's very sobering, like our own mortality is one, something that they, in a way, it's kind of like, get it together. And it's like, oh, I'm gonna die. I should stop wasting my time. Um, and so if we think about that, then the mind, it kind of will get a little bit more restrained. It will, the mind will be sober up a little bit. It'll stop kind of moving here and there as much. So those are five different things we can do that can, to just check and see how, when excitation is arising, look at those five antidotes and see if they work. Uh, okay, any thoughts or questions so far about what we've covered?
What about dealing with moments if your mind is excited, but then maybe you get strong emotion that hits you, a past something? How do you deal with that maybe at the moments of meditation?
So there's going to kind of be a different section where we will look at like mental states that are different, like so maybe when we get to that section, that'll be different, because these are just these first five are kind of, because typically, like when motions do arise, I mean, of course sometimes it could be sadness, if we're going, but a lot of times it's anger or jealousy, or it's kind of the afflicted states. It's like this argument that we had, and like we get angry in the meditation. So we'll look at that, and then we'll see. But I mean, basically, it's kind of understanding what I mean, of course, the best thing to do, or in general, the thing that works for any emotional state, um, is just to recognize that um, we can choose. We have the power to choose what we're focusing on. And that's just a skill that we get better at over time, right? Whatever arises, because all distractions are the same in the sense that they're not the intended object. So whether, we're thinking about something that we would rather be doing, or we're thinking about something that we want to say to someone to get back at them for something that they said to us, or we're replaying, whatever it is, the slight that we experienced. And um, it's all, and some of those are more emotionally charged than others, but if we get in the habit of noticing the arising of distraction and putting our mind back on the intended object, then um, that works equally well for all kinds of distractions. So we may find that, you know, we went down a rabbit hole for longer than we intended, but whenever it is that we do notice, then we just, say this is a distraction, this is not the intended object, and we just lift our awareness up and move back. Um, and then over time, we recognize that it isn't really that initial, whatever the initial impulse is, that's not really the problem. The problem is the next moment when we add a thought to it, and then we add a second thought to it, you know. The first moment of remembering something uncomfortable or unpleasant, or, you know, that's kind of unavoidable. But then when we say, oh, and this is what, you know, next time I see that person, this is what I'm going to say to, you know, to defend myself from what they said, or, you know, when I go into that meeting and they treated me like this, and I'm going to, you know, whatever it is, it's the train of thoughts that we're adding on to kind of the first one that's taking us down this process. It's this thought and this thought and this thought and this thought. And so we kind of recognize that all of these are just thoughts, they're all just mental events that are happening in the mind. um, and I mean, like I said, sometimes it's not always like that, because we, you know, grief and sadness and things like that, that can be quite powerful if we're dealing with something. And when the mind, what we're going to notice is when mind gets more calm, when the mind gets more subtle, there's all kinds of things that bubble up to the surface. In when the mind is going through that process of becoming more subtle. Um, so, you know, but in, you know, in general, it's just about understanding that we do have control over what we are attending to. We don't necessarily have control over what pops into the mind, you know, kind of from the subconscious that's sort of bubbling into the conscious mind. But in the next moment, we have control over whether we add more thoughts to that, or whether we just let it go and move the mind back to the intended object. Um, so, but it's just, yeah, it's a slow process. And um, so, on the other hand, if dullness is arising in the mind, if the mind is sluggish or, um, you know, sleepy, so again, the first thing to check with that is that our posture might have responded, you know, probably has responded to that. And maybe the chin is dropping too much, or the shoulders are rounding a bit too much. You know, we've stopped holding the body upright. Um, and that is kind of because there's relaxation. That's probably too much physical relaxation has probably happened. So if we just reassert kind of an upright posture, we make sure that the chin is, you know, a little bit tucked, but certainly not like, you know, if we recognize that the neck is actually getting involved, and, you know, and we're just looking at the floor, then just by correcting our posture, that can give a signal to the mind, that, you know, oh, we need to sit, you know, same thing that our parents told us, you know, sit up straight, you know, when we were, you know, kind of just, you know, kind of hunched and just kind of, you know, if we really maintain. And that's also, we want to really get into that habit of correcting that as we go along, because that will support, you know, what we're trying to do with the mind. And then also, you know, raising, instead of lowering the amount of light, if we raise the amount of light in the room, turning on a bright light, or opening, you know, opening the shades or something and having more light. Because we are, you know, maybe our eyes are three-fourths of the way closed, and that can be, you know, typically, historically, we've spent a long time where we've associated that kind of thing with going to sleep. So we need to counteract that by making sure that there's substantial ambient light in the room, perhaps, to make sure that we're not sending that signal to the mind that it's time to take a nap. Um, And then there's an alternative version of that seed meditation at the navel, um, that we can use to counteract dullness. So with this alteration, we begin visualizing it at the navel, inside, you know, at the level of the navel, inside the body. But instead of holding it there, we bring it up in our imagination. We, you know, we imagine that it's rising, and we kind of shoot it out through the top of the back of the head. And we imagine that it goes out into space. And we can then just imagine that there's another one that appears and we do it again. And, so we shoot it, we repeat that process maybe for 2, 3 minutes, just kind of bringing up these, shooting out these small seeds. Because again, like we mentioned, with excitation, the problem is that the mind was sort of bubbling up. And here and so we were trying to bring it down. With dullness, the mind is already down, the mind is already too low. So we're trying to intentionally now raise it. We're trying to do the opposite of counteracting excitation. We're trying to basically add a little bit of excitation. We're trying to interject some bubbling up of the energy. So by concentrating more on the upper chakras, then we are kind of accomplishing that. We're bringing in some excitation. And then instead of meditating on a um, sobering topic, we might spend a couple of minutes meditating on something that we find very joyful, very, very uplifting. So we might think about our Buddha nature and how extraordinary it is that we possess Buddha nature, and we have this incredible, or we might think about, our perfect human rebirth and how extraordinary it is that not only do we have Buddha nature, but we have all of the necessary internal and external conditions in order to make spiritual progress. Or we might think about the qualities of the spiritual guide. And, if we're identifying with a particular teacher, His Holiness, or, someone that's in the world that we think of as a mentor, as a guide in some way, like their extraordinary qualities and how amazing it is that they travel the world and they build these monasteries and these nunneries and they give teachings and they do all of these, that kind of adding that kind of joy, to the mind can really counteract a dull mind. Um, and then physically, we may all, and again, there's some practical things too. We may need to think about, am I sleeping well? Because many people are chronically sleep deprived. So we may need to really think about our sleep hygiene and practicing good sleep habits, getting enough rest so that we are refreshed and that we're not, that the mind isn't in a kind of state where it's going to look for any cues, like, kind of closing to just immediately want to go to sleep because we're not getting enough sleep. And could be also if we are like working a lot, working all day, and then we have a commute and we're coming home and we're trying to meditate kind of after all of that, then we may just be a little bit, tired. So it could be that a few minutes of maybe light exercise before we engage in the session, that could really be helpful. Just some movement, maybe just going around the block, or doing some yoga, some tai chi, some qigong, nothing too tiring, but something that just kind of slightly elevates the heart a little bit, gives us a little bit of physical stimulation, can counteract maybe the demands of the day, and then we are a little bit more refreshed when we go into the session. Okay. So then there's, as I mentioned, over application and non-application. So this is so non-application is is something that we do that is relevant for beginners like us, where we're just not applying any antidotes. That we've recognized that excitation is arising in the mind. We've recognized that dullness is arising in the mind. We've we've recognized that we're forgetting the object. The mind is moving into these but we're not doing anything about it. That's non-application. It just means we're we're just tolerant of excitation, dullness, or forgetfulness. We're just kind of going with the flow and doing nothing to correct that. Um, so that's a problem. Meditation is not daydreaming. It's not just doing whatever we want. I mean, it has a purpose, right? It's a 10 or 20-minute period of time where we have a chosen object and we really want to take it seriously. Um, Again, with a sense of a sense of lightness in the mind, playfulness in the mind, not like, seeing it as this task, but um, having a curious, open mind, but still recognizing that there is an object and my goal is to stay on the object. That's the idea of what I'm doing. So when forgetfulness, when excitation, when dullness, when they arise, I need to figure out that that's what's happening and what's the appropriate antidote, to do something about that, to correct that. And if we don't do that, then it is sort of like daydreaming. It is sort of like just kind of having a, relaxing time, or just kind of zoning out, or not, just sort of like, oh, this is a fun thing that I'm doing that isn't really serious. It doesn't really have a purpose. It's just kind of a break from my day, and that's all that it is. Um, and so, non-application is something that we need to address. Over application really doesn't come into play until the later stages of meditative absorption, where a person is getting kind of relatively close to maybe developing fully qualified calm abiding. Um, so there's no danger really of over application for a beginner, but over application does happen at more advanced stages of meditation. And what over application is, it's it's a habit where we, because for a long time we had all of these really strong distractions arising in the mind, and we were looking out for them and we were diligently applying the antidotes. Then eventually, though, the distractions themselves, as we've mentioned in previous classes, the distractions, just because we're getting better at concentrating, the distractions will arise less often, they'll be less intense, and they will abide for shorter periods of time. And in the really late stages, there these gross, coarse distractions really aren't arising very much at all. But we're still kind of hunting for them in the mind. We're still kind of looking in an intense way. And at these really refined stages of concentration, that's an obstacle. That's actually a problem when you're anticipating the arrival of a distraction that really isn't going to arise because of the level of skill that you've acquired. Um, so you're adding in to a really focused attention. You're adding in discursiveness that doesn't need to be there because you're anticipating a problem that by its nature really isn't going to arise. So that you're over applying the antidotes. Um, so that's again, if a person is kind of on the sixth, seventh, eighth level, of calm abiding, then they need to think about, over application. But it doesn't really come into play until then. Okay, so those are the five kind of historical um, uh, obstacles and their antidotes. Um, any thoughts or questions? Mhm. I think you're still muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep,
Uh, with calm abiding, I was not aware that there was different levels to it. I was wondering if you could speak to that.
sure. So the goal, if a person is taking the development of calm abiding as their goal, which is an amazing goal, for a person to be aiming toward, because once you accomplish that, it's exceptionally useful to have that ability as when you're then able to come at all of your meditations from the capacity of someone who has developed fully qualified calm abiding. So that's, once you've developed what's called fully qualified calm abiding, then you're set. Then like you have it. But between a person who's never meditated and a person who's developed fully qualified calm abiding, they describe that journey of moving toward that as taking place in 9 stages. And each stage has a definition that describes for that meditator, um, essentially describes how often, how intense, and how long the distractions are arising in their sessions of meditation. So, for a person who's just starting to meditate, the distractions are constant, they are long lasting, and they are compelling. You really get absorbed into the distractions. You get fully taken away from the object. You get carried away fully by the distractions. So it's happening a lot, it's happening intensely, and it's happening for most of your session of meditation, so in a 10-minute session, you might only be on the object for a minute, of that 10 minutes for a person who's never really meditated before. And then the second stage, the third stage, the fourth, you're all of that is changing. Each stage, and as I mentioned before, it's really arbitrary. You could, just decide that there's more stages than that, less stages than that, but it's just a helpful way of describing what meditators, how things are going. At this level, you should expect that this is what it's like. At the next level, you should expect that this is what it's like. And so gives you a sense of what level you're on. If you look at the definitions, if you read about these, you just kind of can check like, okay, it does kind of seem like this is my experience. So that most likely means I've progressed to the first stage, the second stage, etc. Um, then, essentially, at a certain point, when a person develops fully qualified calm abiding, which is, in a way, it's almost like the 10th level of calm abiding, but um, you you're on the ninth level. Basically, you're on the ninth level, and at a certain point, what they say is that there's a physical and mental bliss and pliancy that arises in your sessions of meditation for a person who's entered into the ninth level. So in a way, it's either the end of the ninth level, or if you want to think about it as like a 10th level, there's no 10th level, but it's on the ninth level, you start out and there's no physical or mental bliss and pliancy. At a certain point, physical and mental bliss and pliancy arise. And now you have fully qualified calm abiding. So the mind and the body, they feel light, they feel blissful, and it's literally like sort of an ecstatic, state, a state of bliss that arise. And so your physical body feels light and blissful. Your mind feels light and blissful all of the time, just because you're meditating. Um, and this occurs on the ninth stage, which is a stage in which the meditator enters an extremely deep meditative absorption into the object without really any effort. It doesn't take them any time. They can do it anywhere, whether there's a marching band playing, whether there's rock music, whether there's, they can choose in regardless of, they can just they'll sit and they enter this incredibly deep state, and then they are fully absorbed. There's whatever's happening around them is irrelevant to them. um, Still seems like they have the ability to be alert to like danger, um, but you know, but it doesn't otherwise, they don't really, they're not bothered by noise or what's occurring, and they can sustain that even for weeks, if they wanted to. Maybe that's not productive or necessary, but certainly they would probably sustain it for 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours. um, they might certainly do that. Whether it's productive to really sit in meditation for a week, maybe not, but they could if they wanted to. They could just uh, they don't need to eat, they don't need to drink. I mean, they do eventually. Like they couldn't do it for a year or even a month, but they could do it for a week or two if they really wanted to, because the body basically shuts down. Their physical, their breathing, their heart rate. Um, they don't really, they don't need to eat or drink anything really for a while, because their body just is so fully absorbed. Their mind is just so withdrawn that the body kind of, they are breathing, they do have a heartbeat, but they're breathing very shallowly, very slowly. Their heart is not beating normally. Um, and so, and they're able to just um, and there's basically no distractions arising. Whatever the object is, they say that the object in the mind is like water being poured into water. It's just only the object is arising. The object arises in an incredibly vibrant, immediate kind of, just like they are directly looking at the object. They are fully absorbed into the object. Nothing but the object arises in the mind. So if you're meditating on love, it's like your mind is love, and that there's nothing other than love, in the mind. The mind is fully suffused with that state. And it's like your mind is generated into that state, and it doesn't degenerate, it doesn't change, it doesn't move into something else. It's only that for as long as you might want it to remain there. Um, and like I said, there's this physical and mental bliss and pliancy, which isn't true at the beginning of the ninth stage, but it becomes true for the meditator. They develop this physical and mental bliss, and that is fully qualified, what they call fully qualified calm abiding. And so when that's happening for you, then that this is the ninth stage of fully qualified calm abiding. It does require a retreat. It isn't something that can be developed in just your life. Like if you're just if you're working and you have like, you're just meditating every day, that's, of course, that's where you would start. But you'll kind of max out in your daily life. You'll get to something like the sixth stage, maybe sixth, seventh stage, if you have a really disciplined daily practice. After a number of years, you'll kind of max out, and then you have to do long retreat. You have to, and when I say long retreat, um, you you're just meditating. You go somewhere where they are going to feed you, um, and you pay them to feed you. And it's safe and it's warm, and so you're not worried about, you have a cabin or you have a something, and you're in safe environment, and you're getting food delivered, to your cabin or whatever, and you're meditating, you know 8, 10, 12 hours a day. Maybe you're also doing some reading, some study, some reading, but you're not working a job, you're not going, you're not socializing, you're not doing fun things, you're not going to movies, you're not socializing, you're not interacting with other people, you're meditating for 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And you probably have to do that. Well, I mean, historically, in the historical literature, what they say is, something maybe like 6 months of that kind of. But most modern meditators will say, from what I understand, that our minds are really not as well set up to do it that quickly because we're habituated to our phones and the pace of our lives. So they really would say that 6 months is not practical. It's probably, and of course you don't, you know, you could take some breaks, you could do, uh, you know, 3 months, 6 months, and then come out of retreat and kind of go back to your life and, kind of go back and then do another 6 months, maybe, in a year and a half. Um, you know, i- or you could try to do, 2 months every year or something, and try, you're using these retreat periods to really make progress. Um, you know, and it's different. People are different and there's different predispositions, but generally speaking, the more retreat that a person can do, the longer periods of retreat that a person can do, the better that is compared to, and so, but of course, that means you have to become someone who's prepared for that, right? If you just take an ordinary person and you put them into a 6 month retreat, they would go insane. Like they would start climbing the walls. It would not be a productive experience. You need to spend 5, 10 years becoming someone for whom it's practical to do a 6 month retreat, in order to, someone for whom that kind of solitude and focused, is makes sense. So we use our lives to get to that point, and then hopefully we have the ability to do to do more and more retreat once that becomes reasonable for a person. But you really, from what I understand, they basically say if you don't do long retreat, you won't develop fully qualified calm abiding. It just can't be done. If you're trying to work a job, if you're socializing, the mind just never gets subtle enough. The mind, because you're engaging with objects too much. The mind is going outward. The mind is too busy to ever get to that level. But once you have it, then you can be you actually can, it's not like you have to stay in retreat forever. Once you have fully qualified calm abiding, you're able to sustain it, even if you go back and you have, a relatively normal life. You have to still do, you still have to meditate every, day. You can't just like, um, they say at that point, and also throughout this process, really one of the most important foundational practices is our practice of ethics. If we are um, harming other people not intentionally in the sense because it's these delusory states but if we're not doing anything about it, if we're not trying actively to reduce our habits of killing, of stealing, of lying, of sexual misconduct, those are all things that are going to prevent us from, because again, we're adding agitation to the mind. When we're harming others, the mind is disturbed, the mind is agitated, and that in and of itself will prevent us from ever getting to this incredibly deep state of mind. So, um, it's really important to make sure that we're supporting our practice by taking our ethical obligations seriously. If not, then that will be an obstacle itself. Okay, so then there's a sort of a separate set of five obstacles also. These are the five negative states of mind. Like I said, you know, um, these are all things that are associated with non-virtue or, with ethical lapses. So if we don't do anything about them, they're problematic. Um, and these are the kinds, when we talk about distractions that are arising in meditation, they usually are related to one of these five states because when, we never really get obsessed about the pen that's on our table, right? If we're meditating and there's a table in front of us and has a pen on it, we don't find that like this pen on the table is what's going to arise in my mind because it's a neutral object. It's not charged in any way. It doesn't have any real power. The objects that have power to bring us out of our intended object are objects that have a relationship to these five negative states of mind. So the first is attachment. Um, so attachment is a mind that um, is apprehending something that seems pleasant, seems enjoyable, and exaggerates its pleasantness or its desirable quality. And then, on the basis of this exaggeration, on the basis of this kind of layering on top of what's there, the mind feels as though one's own happiness, one's own peace of mind is dependent on contacting this pleasant object. So it is a mind that is unbalanced, a mind that isn't realistically apprehending its object, but it's relating to it in an exaggerated way. So it's not love, it's not, wishing people well, it's not, but it's feeling like, if I can't be with this person who I think is sort of in the nature of happiness, then I myself will be miserable. There's no choice but for me to be miserable unless I can spend every waking moment with this person who has these amazing qualities. And that's just not true. Like people don't exist in that way. People, yeah, there are certainly people that we get along with that, that make us feel good. They reinforce the kind of the way that we see the world. They say nice things, they do nice things, and we find that pleasant. We enjoy being around that. But, it isn't true that they also have some qualities that are not great. They also have, and just because they reinforce our own beliefs about ourselves and the world, that means that there's no inherent benefit to that, right? We like the fact that they have a similar worldview, and we don't like the fact that some other people have very different worldviews. But that's just the ego, like operating and wanting to feel comfortable, wanting to feel validated. It isn't, again, it's not realistic. It's not actually seeing things as they are. It's seeing things through a very self-centered lens. Um, and these are, as I said, these are the kinds of objects that do often arise. I would, oh, I could really go for this kind of food right now that makes me happy when I eat it. Or, oh, I really wish that I was, having this other kind of experience, seeing this, new movie that I'm excited about, or going to a play or the opera, or, you know, um, the symphony, or whatever it is, these things that these external circumstances that we've decided are in the nature of happiness, and that by being in contact with them, we ourselves will be happy. um, this is what brings the mind out of meditation, are these sorts of objects. objects, um, objects that we're relating to through the energy of attachment. Um, so then there's anger or aversion, which is sort of the flip side of attachment. Um, so attachment is related to objects that have a pleasantness to them in our own mind. Um, Other people might disagree. They might be like, how can you stand that kind of music or that type of food? Or how do you spend time with this person who I think is, the worst person ever? So that demonstrates that it's coming from our own mind. If it wasn't coming from just our own mind, we'd all be in agreement about what food is delicious, what music is the right kind of music, what kind of people are the best people to spend time with. But no one does agree on those things because it's a projection of each individual person's mind. Um, so it has nothing really to do with the object. It's a projection that's coming from the side of the person who's layering on top of what's there. But anger does the same thing with objects that seem unpleasant, that seem difficult, that seem painful, so these sorts of objects are not objects that we want to be in contact with, but rather objects that we are averse to and wish to be separated from. So this happens when people insult us, when people don't do what we want, when people don't act in ways that was there a problem with the sound or
I'm sorry, my dogs are barking.
no problem. So anger is based on aversion, which is the opposite of attachment. Attachment wants to be in touch with the object. Aversion wants to be separated from the object. Um, and they're both exaggerated minds. They're both layering on top of what's there and not seeing clearly the nature of the object, and feeling like one's happiness is threatened either way. Either one's happiness is threatened if I can't be in contact with the object of attachment, or one's happiness is threatened because I am in contact with the object of aversion, the thing that I find unpleasant, difficult, painful. Um, and again, this happens all the time in meditation. We think, how dare that person say that to me? Or how dare that person cut me off in traffic this morning? How dare my boss, you know, say that thing in front of these other people while I was, in the meeting and make me feel like I made a mistake and I didn't make a mistake. He made the mistake, you know. Um, all of these things when things aren't happening as we would hope, then those are the things that we are going to perseverate on in our session of meditation rather than the intended object. There are these emotional, like you were saying, these emotionally charged objects, either charged with attachment or charged with aversion. And then there's deluded pride. So this is the third negative mental state. So deluded pride is different than just pride in general. Pride in general is kind of feeling good about something useful or constructive that happened. That's fine. Like there's nothing like, if you completed something and it went well and you're like, yeah, I did this thing and it went well, um, and you're pleased with that, that's great. There's no problem. Deluded pride is comparative mind. It um, it's a mind of feel a mind of superiority. So it isn't just feeling satisfied or feeling good, but on the basis of some quality that you think you have, or something that you think you've done, something that you think you are. You think on the basis of that, I'm better than other people. I'm better than, you know, Yeah, just you compare yourself to others because of qualities, and you may have those qualities, or you may not have the, you might be misjudging. Some people think that they're better at something than they are. They think, there's those clips from American Idol where people think they're this amazing singer and they're actually really terrible at singing, right? And there's also people that are amazing at singing, right? But just because you're amazing at singing, you might think, oh, well, people should treat me better. They should be nice to me. They should give me money. They should say, and if they don't, then because I'm this well-known singer, then I can treat them badly. I can be dismissive. I can be haughty. I can disregard them if they don't treat me, if they don't, act in accord with my station on the basis of my talent, my skill. Um, so we may be exaggerating our qualities or we may not, but the important thing is that we're comparing ourselves with others. So it has this comparative element of feeling superior. And it's a problem. In terms of meditation, this is a problem because we might discard certain topics of meditation thinking, oh, I already know that, or we might be averse to like repeating the same, because there is repetition, we're trying to get to a real sense of mastery of these objects, right? These insights that we're trying to have. So we might cut that process short by thinking, well, yeah, I've already done that. I've heard that before. I know that. I don't need to study that, you know, and so that in a sense is thinking that we're better than other practitioners who are willing to like keep going back to those same topics and keep deepening their understanding. Like think, no, like I'm above where I am really because I'm just gonna like that's enough. I'm done with that. Or I've thought about this and yeah, the low scope, I don't really need the low scope. I can just go right to the middle scope, you know, that's a mistaken way of thinking. So this attitude of superiority, of, it's the opposite of humility. It's the opposite of, really doing the work, really, just being willing to engage in this again and again and again, because we've just decided, I'm good. I'm past this. Now, at a certain point, if we genuinely have a direct meditative realization on the basis of fully qualified Kama body, I mean, yeah, there comes a point where it is enough, but is it true that we're at that point? I mean, no, probably not. Unless we have fully qualified Kama abiding, unless we have a direct non-conceptual realization, there's more work to be done. There's more that we can get from that topic. Um, so, okay, so then jealousy or envy is also a comparative mind. Um, but with jealousy or envy, there's an element almost of anger, that is coming into this comparison because it's a mind that is unhappy at the good fortune of others. Other people have the nice car, other people have the good job or the raise, or other people have more money in their bank account, or they have better clothes, or they have the admiration of this group of people that and we don't want them to experience that. We want to be experiencing it. It isn't just that we're also working in that direction, but we're actually like unsatisfied that there are people who have accomplished that, who, they're like, why we think instead of thinking this could also be me, we think, why is this not me? Why is it this person? Why is it not me? Why are they having this? Why am I not having this? Um, so, it's a dissatisfied mind. It's a miserable mind that never rejoices in the happiness of others. Um, and so, and it's a tight kind of greedy mind that never that isn't thinking in terms of abundance and isn't thinking in terms of oh, I wish everyone could be like that, I wish everyone could have that. It's just thinking about this person has it, how dare they have it, why do they have it, why is it, it's never me, it's always other people. um, and this kind of thinking is again something that is very emotionally charged, very um, you know, something that really takes us out of these deep states of concentration when we're just like, "Oh, I can't believe that this person got the raise and not me, and why is it always other people?" So if we don't do something to counteract that, it's going to keep coming up, in our sessions of meditation. Okay, and then the fifth is, of course, what we've talked about in various places, fundamental ignorance, mabrigpa, fundamental ignorance. And all of the delusions are empowered by fundamental ignorance. So um, they are all, and then of course, so if we didn't have fundamental ignorance, we wouldn't have attachment, we wouldn't have jealousy, we wouldn't have all of these, anger and all of these deluded pride, all of these afflicted states. They would all evaporate in a mind that is free from fundamental ignorance. So they're all mixed with that, and they're all empowered by that. So of course, wisdom, is the antidote to So we talked before about sort of conventional antidotes and then ultimate antidotes. So, when deluded pride, for example, is arising, the conventional antidote to deluded pride is to remind oneself of all of the things that one does not know. All of the, we might be good at, we might have spent time developing certain skills, how to change a tire, how to, do accounting, whatever it is. But we don't know how to fly a plane. We don't know how to perform neurosurgery. We don't know, maybe we don't even know like CPR. Maybe we don't know how to dress a wound. If someone has a gunshot wound, like the person who knows what to do with a gunshot wound is really a valuable person. And the person who knows accounting is useless in that scenario. Or, when your pilot falls over, the person on the plane that also knows how to land the plane is like the most important person. There might be the world's foremost heart surgeon on that plane. That person's useless in that crisis, right? So, yeah, we have certain skills, certain abilities, but they're only useful in certain circumstances. Um, but we just tend to focus on that and ignore all of the and also we can think about all of the spiritual things that we haven't studied, that we don't know, all of the realizations that we've not generated in the mind. So there's all kinds of things that we can do to combat this, the arising of deluded pride in the mind. But those are conventional antidotes, right? Or with like anger, we can think about, we can try to generate some love. We can try to generate some compassion toward the person who made us. We can try to think about their good qualities instead of focusing on their, the one time that they said something unkind. We can think of the times in the past when they did show kindness, or they're generally their good qualities. Um, or we can try to develop patience, a mind that is willing to undergo hardship, instead of kind of the fragile mind that can only bear, being treated kindly and patient, so but with all of those conventional antidotes, really what they're going to do is they're going to suppress the affliction in the moment, right? If you have deluded pride arising and you think about all of the things you don't know, you might reduce or control your deluded pride in that moment. a week from that day, deluded pride could certainly arise again in the mind because the seed, the empowering condition of ignorance, is still present in the mind. So you're subject to anger, you're subject to jealousy. Now, the more familiar we get with these conventional antidotes, the more we can kind of quickly draw on them. That's certainly incredibly useful, right? If we can cut off the angry mind or the jealous mind or the, you know, attached mind with these conventional antidotes, there's a lot of benefit to that in that day, in that moment. But still, because fundamental ignorance is there, they have the necessary seed to arise again and again and again in the future. So ultimately, what we want to do is develop our wisdom and overcome fundamental ignorance. And then we cut the trunk of all of the delusions, like thinking of, the branch of ignorance or the branch of jealousy, the branch of anger, the branch of attachment. They are all attached to the tree of fundamental ignorance. You cut down the tree, you don't have to worry. You don't have to then play this whack-a-mole of, okay, well, deluded pride is arising, so I'll think about all of the things I don't know. Anger is arising, so I'll think about patience. Attachment is arising, so I'll think about the, you know, um, contaminated aspects of the object of attachment that's arising in my mind. If wisdom, stainless wisdom that realizes the nature of reality is arising in the mind, then all of those are eliminated all at once. And that's really what we're aiming for. That's the ultimate goal. Um, but there's a lot of things that we have to do to create the correct inner conditions so that we have the right sort of mind that can realize that kind of wisdom. Um, if we are constantly um, indulging in attachment and pride, all of these things, and we're never kind of tamping them down, probably we won't get to a level of meditative stillness where the object, because the object of the nature of reality is an incredibly subtle object. So you have to have an incredibly powerful mind to realize that object, which is why calm abiding, in part is so necessary. I mean, at that point, really, it's necessary. Prior to that, it's just sort of incredibly useful, but it's actually necessary to have a direct non-conceptual realization of the nature of reality. Fully qualified, unfortunately, fully qualified calm abiding is actually, not a nice to have. It's a necessary condition. Okay. Any thoughts or questions? Let's see. Okay. So the next thing we will look at is a session of meditation, any given session of meditation, like what are the parts? How does a person go about setting up any given kind of what's the template for engaging in a session of meditation? So there are, in a way, um, there's five. I would say that there's five parts to the session. I mean, six, if you depends on how you want to divide it up. But so we talked in the first class about having a place where you might, setting up a place. We talked about the altar if you wanted to have, the idea generally is that it's good to have a place where you're going to go every time you meditate. And that place kind of moves the mind, supports the mind in a virtuous, so you have images that are inspiring, uplifting, you have a beautiful sort of space. So we talked a little bit about how that setting up an altar or a table, with representations. And again, it's your space, so people should set it up however they want. But historically, the instruction is so an altar really is just a table, but it's a table that's only used as your altar. It's not like also your dinner table or also like your study place. It's literally just for meditation. So you set it up, you put like a nice cloth on it, maybe brocade, um, on top to make it again, because you want this place to be beautiful, to be uplifting to the mind, to kind of help you transition into your meditation. Um, so, and then maybe you'll have representations of the Buddha's body, speech, and mind on the altar. So the body would be a statue or a picture. The mind is a stupa, stupa. We talked about, having a stupa, they small, and again, it could be an image of a stupa, or they sell actual, like physical statues that are stupas. Um, and then you would have a text, some sort of text. Typically, it would be a sutra, the printed out sutra of the Buddha. So it could be the Heart Sutra or, any kind of short sutra that you print out. There are places where you can have them print, where they have them on pecha, kind of the Tibetan text in this kind of rectangles that they use. That's that's just the traditional historical Tibetan way. Is they're printed in these strips of rectangles, and they're, so you have like a stack. It's not 8 by 5 pages that you turn. It's literally a stack of pecha. But whatever, I mean, um, so you have these three representations of body, speech, and mind of the Buddha on the altar. You may have water bowls, so you may be doing water bowl offerings, etc. So, and you may have things on the walls, things that they're, could be the fabric paintings that are common, different kinds of things that you may have just to create a really nice space. So the first step, if a person has something like that, then the first step is to look at that space and to do a little bit of cleaning, to, just kind of make sure that that's tidy, that, maybe you have a little, um, like a little brush and a little dustpan, and you kind of dust. It's more of a ritual. If you're doing it every day, the the thinking is, well, you're just not allowing it to ever get done. It isn't like, oh, you waited 2 weeks and now there's visible dust everywhere. The idea is you do it every single day as a part of your practice out of respect, kind of to maintain that space. And you don't want to ever let it get to the point where you're actually seeing it in a problematic way. So every day you do a little bit of tidying of that space, which is helpful for the mind. And like I say, you may do water bowl offerings. That's very common, at least not before every session necessarily, but at least in the morning, before your first session, you might do water bowl offerings. That's the first step. And so you kind of clean the space and you set out offerings at least once a day in the morning. Then you get to the second step, where you are, um, you sit and meditate. You sit on the cushion, you adjust your posture, you get into meditation posture, um, and So you're just kind of thinking about your posture. Am I comfortable? Am I stable? That sort of thing. Once you have set out the offerings and you've cleaned the space, you sit in the correct posture. Then the second step is you generate a motivation. And you've been in the morning, express meditations, and that's sort of the same general idea. You want to, Venerable Urbina calls this stating your purpose, kind of saying like, why am I meditating? I'm going to do a session of meditation, but why? What is that in service to? What is it? What goal is it fulfilling? Could be, I mean, because we have different motivations for doing things, right? It could be, oh, I'm just really stressed out. I just want to feel better. That's a pretty limited, from the Buddhist perspective, that's a pretty limited motivation. Um, just to think, oh, I just don't feel great. And maybe if I do this, I'll feel better when I'm done. That's the only reason. That's pretty narrow. That's pretty self-centered. Um, it's better to kind of think about y- why do you have a practice? What's the overall goal? And, thinking about at least trying to frame it in terms of others, in terms of, when I become more familiar with these constructive states of mind, my interactions will be improved with others. I'll have more spaciousness in the mind. I'll find it easier to gravitate toward being kind, being patient, being loving. That's helpful for others. Um, of course, the most sublime motivation in Tibetan Buddhism is bodhicitta, the wish to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. There's no motivation that's higher than that. You can't surpass. That's literally called the unsurpassable. Like in English, one of the, you know, synonyms or adjectives is unsurpassable. It cannot be, the state of enlightenment. There is nothing beyond that. So if we can have that as our motivation, then that's the best. But generally, we want to have it be altruistic. We want to have it be broad and thinking about, others in some way. And that's the purpose of what we're going to do next. It isn't just to do the thing, it's to do that because we want to accomplish this goal of being more useful for others. So we set our motivation, and there are, of course, many different ways you can do that. There's FPMT at fpmt.org in the Foundation Store. There's a text called Daily Prayers, which has a number of helpful um, things that will, kind of give you ideas about, and of course, do whatever feels, just because it's, written there doesn't mean you have to do that. People will, Buddhists will, often include refuge, going for refuge and generating bodhicitta, the prayer that maybe you've heard on some of our recordings, like the short refuge and bodhicitta prayer. That's very common at this point. But the idea is just that you are stating your purpose. You're saying, what you're doing. And then the third step is the actual session, the 10 or 20 minutes or whatever of familiarizing your mind with impermanence or compassion or, whatever it is, the actual session. And this is when we have those, if it's analytical, then you or again, if it's impermanence, you're thinking about how do I demonstrate impermanence to myself? Well, people age, people die, plants die, the seasons change, things break, things, things change on the molecular level. My own body, I'm respiring, I'm eating, I'm drinking. The cells of my body are turning over. The mitochondria in each moment are so this incredible dynamism is happening in my own body. All these different lines of analysis, right? To prove to yourself that everything is impermanent, that everything is changing moment by moment by moment. So you begin with that analysis, and then some feeling that, oh, yeah, this is true. Some insight arises, and then you focus your mind on that insight. So we have these two stages of the actual session where you're generating the object and then you're holding the mind to the object. And that's the actual session. Could be 5 minutes, could be 10 minutes, whatever. Um, where you're generating the object and holding your mind to the object. And then the fourth step is dedicating. And again, we do dedication in all of the Morning Express meditations that you've been in. And this is similar to motivation, but this is, in a way, it's kind of seeing what you've just done as creating the causes of your motivation, right? Because maybe you motivated and then like something happened and didn't actually do anything, right? Like, like, oh, I was motivated to go to the gym today, but I didn't. Like, you can't really dedicate something you didn't do, right? You were motivated, you wanted to get healthy, you wanted to, so you're like, I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to do this in service of my health and so on, but everything, you got distracted and so on, and so you can't really dedicate because you have to have a thing that you do in service of your motivation. But with this, like, we did motivate and now we did the session's now over, so we think, okay, great, that thing that I did, that session, I was motivated to, do all of these things. So now I'm dedicating that, I'm offering that for all of these things. I'm offering that in service of all of these things that I think are useful. And this is really, this kind of, as we've seen in the examples from morning meditation, you really do, ideally you want this to be really aspirational, really broad, really like, just things that seem impossible. Like, because enlightenment, right? I mean, that's a really, I mean, not that enlightenment is necessarily a person's goal, that they are, maybe they're not there yet, but the power of motivation and the power of dedication, they really come from how expansive it is, how kind of out there and broad and just mind-blowing you can make it, right? So you don't want to think in a narrow way. You want to think, may this thing that I just did, may it have all of these like just totally exceptional, extraordinary results. May it serve as the cause and condition to bring about like all of this amazing stuff that I really want to happen, even if it seems like totally, just really impossible to imagine, like completely eliminating. That's how we try to do it, like totally eliminating disease, totally eliminating war, all of, all obstacles completely purified, all enlightened, all beings achieving enlightenment because of this virtuous thing that I myself just that I've just engaged in. May it serve all of these purposes. Um, and again, we we do this for others. We don't think, oh, well, may I have, lower taxes, next year. May my wishes. No, we try to think about this in terms of others. And really one important psychological function of that is that it it kind of reduces the the ego's natural tendency to co-opt our spiritual practice, right? If we offer it, if we think, may may this ripen for others, may all of, maybe what I just did, yeah, I mean, yes, I did it, but may the result inure to the benefit of other sentient beings, then we're kind of eliminating the possibility that we might think, oh, how amazing am I? Because I just did this really cool thing. Like, I'm this great practitioner, because we're offering it, we're giving it away, we're not holding on. So it's this attitude of like not not wanting the positive results. Of course, we do. Of course, it is our own mind that benefits from what we've done. Like we are the one, we do engage in this, we do receive benefits. But when we're trying to really think about it in terms of may these benefits, occur for others, and may any benefits, if I do achieve enlightenment, the enlightenment isn't for me. That's also for others. I only want enlightenment for myself, for others. There's nothing in this for the ego, for oneself. So then the ego doesn't co-opt our spiritual practice because we've given everything away. We've just offered it to others. So offering and dedicating are, kind of the same thing. Kind of just sealing it in this way of, um, you know, thinking all of this positivity, may it serve all of these benefits for others. So that it's every session of meditation should have some, if let's say you're doing 3 or 4 sessions in a day, just hypothetically, all 4 sessions have some kind of motivation and some kind of dedication. So it isn't just morning and evening, like with water bowls. You might do the water bowls in the morning, you might take them down at night, but then if you do 2 or 3 sessions, every single session has at least some kind of motivation and some kind of dedication. Could be more brief, could be more elaborate or more brief, depending on how much time you have. But you should always motivate, and you should always dedicate for any session that you do, of meditation. Okay, so that will be the last topic that we cover tonight. Do you have any thoughts or questions?
Tiny bit off topic here. I'm not really clear on the chakras and how they work with the Buddhism. That's kind of different for me.
Um, it's a very detailed, thing. It relates to the Vajrayana tradition. The Buddha taught, um, the sutra teachings and the tantra teachings, or the Vajrayana tradition. The sutra teachings were the public kind of, all of impermanence and death, and kind of the lam rim is the sutra teachings. And then the Buddha also taught about the subtle energy system of the body itself. And we did, like we did before, with the 3 channels, right? The central channel, the left, and the right. Basically, the chakras are using these 3 channels, the central and the left and the right. And it's understood. And again, these are energetic, they're not physical, they're not like findable. You don't cut somebody open and be like, oh, yeah, here's the central channel. These are energetic, kind of very, very subtle, um, places in the body where energy is flowing. So it's understood. So a chakra is also called a channel knot. It's these places where the central channel and the left and the right are kind of bound up, where the left and the right are kind of wound kind of around the central channel, and they're kind of restricting the central channel. So in the 9 round breathing, we kind of imagine the central channel as unobstructed, right? Like just this empty, we imagine these 3 as being separate. Um, and for the purpose of that meditation, that's fine. Um, but in actuality, these 3 have these places where there are these knots or these constrictions, where they almost create these sort of 3D structures, that can be visualized. And those are chakras, places. They also, like a nexus of energy is another way of talking about it, where you have these 3 channels of energy that are sort of bound up together, and they're creating this sort of structure of energy where the energy is, it's not just flowing in these 3 straight lines. It's actually creating like a, kind of like an intersection, like when you look above at those kind of, when they make these intersections, like literally like highways, where it's like you've got this and you've got this, and they're kind of like doing all of these really crazy spaghetti I mean, sort of like that, where these 3 channels are doing that. And So that is a whole system of meditation where it's understood that these knots are problematic. They're natural. They're like they're not. It's not like some people have knots and some people don't. Um, but that these places of constriction are energetically problematic. Um, so, kind of literally unwinding these knots is a meditative practice that's taught in Vajrayana. And so, yeah, that's sort of the essence of it, is that a chakra is a place where the three channels are coming together and they're kind of bound up. And then there's a whole system of meditation and knowledge and wisdom that deals with the implications of that and how kind of that is in a way what energetically is a problem, and how when we unwind all of that, the energies can flow in different ways. Basically, it's not, I mean, it's not like a moralistic problem, but it's a problem in the sense that the reason that it's a problem, as I understand it, is this unwinding happens at the time of death. When the mind is becoming incredibly subtle, the energy system of the body is kind of dissolving, right? And when it's dissolving, it's doing this unwinding kind of naturally. So when under normal circumstances, the woundness is there, and it's functioning to what it's preventing is it's preventing the subtlest mind, what they call the mind of clear light. It's preventing that from being under our conscious meditative control. Um, and again, that's totally normal, right? Like nature isn't unfortunately, nature isn't like colluding with us to achieve enlightenment. Nature's just kind of doing its own thing, and enlightenment is something that nature permits, but we have to kind of cause it to happen. And it's incredibly, what the Buddha observed is that it's incredibly helpful, kind of like with calm abiding, right? The reason that calm abiding is incredibly helpful is because the mind is extremely subtle, the mind is extremely focused, it's like this extremely powerful microscope that we can cultivate when we have fully qualified calm abiding. The mind of clear light is like that, but so much more so like that. Um, but the mind of clear light doesn't want to arise other than at the time of death. Um, it's kind of being held at bay by these constrictions, by these energy constrictions. Um, and which is good, like it's actually like a good thing, right? Because we don't want the mind of clear light to arise, because then it's only meant to arise when we're dying, when this system is falling away. That the falling away of the energy system of the body allows for the mind of clear light to arise, and the mind of clear light doesn't really serve any normal function other than it's the subtlest that our mind can become as we are going through the natural death process. Um, and we're not going through the death process, so it's just not arising. But a practitioner who can cause the mind of clear light to arise at will is a practitioner who has at their fingertips this extraordinary capacity to use the mind of clear light to meditate on the nature of reality. Um, and so, if you can get to a point by unwinding the knots yourself, if you can get to a point where you now have access to the mind of clear light, then you have this tool, just like calm abiding is a tool that isn't typical, like you have to really cultivate it. Being able to access the mind of clear light is another tool that is incredibly helpful. And so the Buddha taught a whole system of understanding the energy system of the body, working with the energy system of the body, so that that kind of meditator has this new tool at their disposal where their mind is similar to fully qualified calm abiding, but like, I don't know, 10,000, 100,000 times more powerful than that. I'm making the numbers up, but it's some exponentially more powerful way of being able to be absorbed into your object, because your mind, if you have fully qualified calm abiding, your mind is incredibly subtle, but the mind of clear light is literally the subtlest that any consciousness is capable of being. So that is just, and it's just natural. It's, as I say, it will arise for us as we're dying. And so, as I mentioned, I think in the DB class, there are practitioners who, as they're dying, achieve enlightenment because the mind of clear light is naturally arising, and they can use that. Um, it will arise for all of us, but probably we're going to miss it. Like, we're probably going to just kind of sail right through it. If we can recognize that it's arising and we can hold our mind there, then that's really powerful at the time of death. But it's even more powerful if you're not dying and you can do it again tomorrow and you can do it again the next day because it's just a skill that you've developed. So that's why the Buddha taught that whole system of the chakras and the Vajrayana teachings, the tantric teachings. All right, so we'll leave it there. The Vajrasattva class is going to start in a minute, but yeah. Was that clear? Any questions? All right, well, have a good weekend. Will you be in the thing tomorrow at all or no? You'll be there? Great. All right, well, I will see you soon.